Ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing that we Brits are good at, it's apologising. So tonight, let me start by saying I am sorry. You've been awfully kind to us this evening, and how have we repaid you? By being very, very irritating. After all, I know few Americans who enjoy being lectured to on the failings of their foreign policy by 4 effete European liberals wearing trousers which are far too small for them. It might just be me, actually. So an advance warning. While we might sound patronising tonight, we 4 Oxford students are in fact very keen on your funny little country with its funny little people in it. So please bear this in mind, as I'm aware that my tactic of trying to convince a room full of Americans after slagging them off for 7 minutes might not be entirely successful. Indeed, you might say tonight that I will sound like a member of the Alaskan Independence Party trying to run for the Vice President of the United States. What a silly idea. Now, before I continue, I would like to start by responding to my American counterparts, great though they were. David, you said you started your launch against Leo there by saying that he gave few examples of UN effectiveness. Now, Leo was right to mention UNICEF and the other humanitarian organisations, but let the opposition not forget that there has been over 60 peacekeeping operations into the field since 1948, that a total of some 1 million soldiers have been sent on UN missions. Ladies and gentlemen, there are not few examples, there are many examples. We just don't know them.
Point of information.
No, thank you. Again, our opposition criticised its...
Feel free to come over, it's okay.
Thanks for coming, you are quite convincing. Criticised its inclusive nature. I ask again, what is the alternative to inclusion, ladies and gentlemen? Do we ignore the international community and act regardless? As I hope to show you, this isn't an option. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as it exists, the UN could never be irrelevant. If we start on the assumption of equality, that no one country is intrinsically superior to any other, there is no way that this argument can be maintained. Ultimately, you see, the United Nations is the only thing we have that resembles international democracy. As such, it is in many ways analogous to the democratic institutions we so revere in the West, with the same instrumental flaws and the same intrinsic values.
Point of information.
Yes, sir.
Do Libya and China deserve an equal vote?
It's not about having an equal vote, sir. It's about including them, because that is the only way that we can resolve these issues, by listening to them and understanding the issues. Now, of course, multilateral diplomacy is less effective than unilateral belligerence, but that's the nature of democracy. America's current attitude towards the UN can be neatly summarised by one of my favourite George W. Bush's quotes. If this were a dictatorship, it would be a heck of a lot easier, just so long as I'm the dictator. Bush seems blind to the paradoxical nature of his foreign policy, dogmatically insisting on the one hand that democracy is the only moral form of government, while simultaneously neglecting our one international democratic body. For America to arrogantly parade around the world, purporting to promote democracy, purporting to protect liberty, it must first respect the United Nations. But ladies and gentlemen, my colleague Josh has already talked to you about legitimization and the fundamental principles behind the United Nations. I'm instead going to talk to you about how there is simply no alternative in today's world to the United Nations, no matter how big and how clever you are as a country. Now let's think about this carefully. For the sake of argument, let's pretend that I agree with the American neocons and think the global US hegemony is a really, really nice idea. Let's pretend that I am entirely comfortable with the idea of the US as an international police force, slapping the odd dictatorial hand when it gets out of line. Let's pretend I think George W. Bush and his affable band of merry neoconservatives are actually, very brave and magnanimous peacekeepers. Let's pretend that I am a complete idiot. Hard to do, I know. Now, with these assumptions adopted, can we still maintain that the UN is irrelevant? The answer, I'm sure you'll be unsurprised to know, is an unambiguous no. Shortly after the Iraq War, Shashi Tharoor, UN Under-Secretary General for Communications and Public Information, wrote in the London Independent, "When this crisis has passed, the world will still be facing problems of weapons of mass destruction, the degradation of our common environment, of contagious disease and chronic starvation, of human rights and human wrongs, of mass illiteracy and massive displacement. These are problems that no one country, however powerful, can solve on its own, and which are yet the shared responsibility of humankind." I'd like to break this down for a second. Firstly, let's look at the military issues. Now, the proposition seem to think that the weaknesses of the United Nations in times of war and military conflict demonstrates their case indisputably. They will point to the failures of the UN in Yugoslavia or in Rwanda as proof that the international community cannot be relied on to decisively stand up for what is right. Let me make it clear first that we on the opposition are not in any way pretending that the failures of the United Nations in places like Rwanda are anything other than that, indefensible, categorical acts of failure. We are not here to purport that the UN can do no wrong. And we're not pretending that the General Assembly in New York is invariably filled with smiles and laughter, with world leaders holding hands and singing along to John Lennon's Give Peace a Chance. Not that New York hasn't had that effect on us. No, we are here to say that despite its glaring failures, there is and always will be an essential role in international affairs for the United Nations. For one thing, no matter how much America fancies itself as the John McClane of the international community, it simply isn't possible to intervene whenever we think global security is being threatened. Without the support of the United Nations, America goes from John McClane to Hans Gruber, killing innocents and mocking the odd resistance fighter of the line, "Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?" Of course, that's pretty much what America did in Iraq. Now, I'd like to make it emphatically clear here that I'm not comparing Saddam Hussein to Bruce Willis, but it is true that the US went to war without the authorization of the United Nations, and in doing so, effectively stuck its middle finger up the international community. But of course, as we are repeatedly told, the war in Iraq was part of America's so-called war on terror. Here is the problem with the current administration is having trouble digesting. Terrorism is a supranational issue. It is very easy for America to declare war on a sovereign state, pour money into irreparably destroying its economy and infrastructure, and then move on feeling a little safer. The same cannot be done when the war is being fought against a sporadic group of nutcases whose sole aim is to perpetrate fear amongst the West. What America and other countries tend to forget is that terrorism, though, is not the only problem which all countries share in common. Whether it is global warming, HIV/AIDS, or entrenched poverty, there are many issues which cannot be dealt with by one state alone. Now, I could waffle on about these problems for ages, but I'm sadly running out of time. Now, I find it wonderfully appropriate that we Brits are defending the United Nations while some Americans and the odd Brit over there are attacking it. What's so great about this is it allows me to talk in ridiculously hyperbolical terms about this debate. 4 brave, brilliant, and beautiful young Oxford students travel to America to defend the international community from the evil unilateralist America, armed with only one weapon, the power of words. Works wonders with the girls, I can tell you. But behind the jokes, there lies a serious point. If the United Nations seems irrelevant to Americans or to other people around the world, it is largely because of America. Most countries in the world have entered a post-national understanding of global governance and questions of world order. France, Germany, Russia, even China and other world powers are now committed to international rules, forbidding the unilateral use of force. The remarkable achievement is that the very vision outlined by the founding members of the UN has been achieved. The US, however, still insists the UN and other international institutions exist on its own terms. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations needs reform, but most of all it needs America to wake up to a new world order that it itself helped create. The US must realize that it can no longer conduct business unilaterally, that today's problems cannot be dealt with without the support and cooperation of the international community. No global problem is simple enough today that it can be resolved through money and military force alone. As such, the UN is, and always will be, unavoidably relevant. Thank you very much.